Hello. Yes, I'm finally live. I'm sorry for being a little bit late, but yeah, I had planned something special, but sadly it didn't go according to plan. But it will. It. I have something brewing in stores for you guys. So welcome back to Karim Talks about economics, which is my podcast, me Karim, where I talk about economics. I give you an insight into what's happening around the world, and I also try to give you an insight into how we economists think about things, as maybe for a lot of people, mm, they hear the wording that economists say that blah 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 blah, but maybe that's kind of a black box for a lot of people. So I'm going to so in this podcast I try to make it more transparent how we think about these things, about different things, and I will be taking suggestion from you guys if you have any. So three things that characterize this podcast is that it is spontaneous, it is informative, and it is open-minded. It's spontaneous in the sense that a minimal amount um, is planned, so it's less of a presentation, but more of a talk, a discussion. Um, when it's only me, it's with me and you, um, or myself talking to the camera, and you get an insight into how my brain works, how I view the world. Um, and it is informative in the sense that yes, it is going to be entertaining to some degree, but the goal is to get some information out of the podcast. The main goal is that you get something out of watching this, right? That you learn something, or at least I provoke some thoughts in you that then leads to you discovering new things by yourself, right? And thirdly, it's open minded. And it is open minded in the sense that uh, I don't have a specific agenda that rules me, or a specific party line that dictates what I will be talking about and not be talking about. Um, I am also willing to diverge and to take a thought to the extreme in order to understand this thought correctly. It's open-minded in the sense that I will ask questions that I don't know, that I exactly don't know the answer to. I might say something that's wrong, but that's why I would love some input from you guys. Um, and additionally, it is open-minded in the sense that I might have some people that come on, as we've seen. Omar has been with us multiple times, and he gave us an insight into how he viewed the world. Right? Yes. So usually, I start out with talking about the news and if they relate to economics and what kind of things we can expect out of these news with respect to the future, or at least what does it mean for us today. Then we have a follow up from last time. Usually, I have a question that I have planned from the last time, and we discuss it today. And then I read a little bit, and afterwards, um, I and afterwards we choose. Yeah. Okay. To this is Silvio that I have with me on the phone. Silvio, can you maybe remove the camera so I can lower your voice and just make the introduction, and then I can have you with me. So it seems that after all, what I had been brewing for you guys is going to happen today. After all, um, yes. So after the reading, we usually are going to reach some new conclusions together, and we're going to talk about these new thoughts and plan this new question that we'll have the next podcast. And at the very end, we have a Q&A session. Um, and now that that Silvio is with us, that I hinted to yesterday a little bit, that Silvio might have some thoughts about these ideas that we discussed yesterday in Adam Smith. Um, we will be taking that right after going through today's news. So yes, I think I'm sharing my screen with you now, and we always, as always, we start with the corona numbers. We can see that we are now at around 11 million and 700,000 cases, 540 nearly deaths, and 6.6 well, 6,600,000 people that have recovered. Now, something that I've discovered on this website is also that you can see the people that are well, you can see the active cases, but within those active cases you can see the mild conditions, and you can see the serious and critically ill. And you can see that while there are actively around 4.5 million cases, 4,400,000 of these cases are mild conditions. That means that they might not even be at the hospital, right? Um, which again relates back to the idea that we're making more testing, right? And we might have that it's a younger population that are getting infected currently. And the seriously critically ill globally is at 60,000, which is not a very high number, which is positive, of course, right? And that equates around to around 1% of all the active cases. If we look at the uh, new cases of corona, we see that the US um, yesterday had 44,000 new cases, which is around the same that it also had the day before that, right? That this is an improvement, as for a couple of days it was up around 50,000, and one day it even hit 57,000. Now Brazil is significantly down um, at 26,000 new cases, and the question is here: can it really be true that um, from one day to the other there is 20,000 less new cases? Well, I doubt it. Maybe it has something to do with it being Sunday and people not going to be tested that day, or that they just tested less that day, or something like that. For me, usually, and for us economists, usually, we consider the things more in a long run, because we know that in the short run, when we look at data, there will be those fluctuations due to misreporting and the like. Now, more significantly, here you see that India has now more cases, or at least more total cases, um, than Russia. So it's now at top three, and Russia is at top four. And India has 23,000 new cases. Um, yes. And South Africa, as we saw yesterday, was up at 10,000, but today it's at 8,700. So that's definitely an improvement. Um, the first news that I have up here is from Bloomberg, where we see that Amazon has hit 3,000. Now, Tesla hit $1,200, and here I mean the share price, and this indicates that that investors are putting their money in shares. It could mean that more people are investing into the market and they see that the country might recover. But um, as I think I've highlighted before, it might also mean that people are moving away from bonds and just putting their money into equities, right? Because in bonds you really don't get a reward anymore. The interest rate is nearly at 0%, in the US, or very near to that. So you don't really save the value of your money by buying bonds anymore. Now, one thing is also that Trump this day, today said that the S&P 500 is at the highest level that it has ever reached, or maybe it was the Nasdaq. I don't remember, correctly, but he tweeted about that, and he was very very proud of that. Um, so that's something to have in mind, and that's of course a tactic that he's using. He's using the thing that he've built the economy once, and he's now been able to build it twice, and that's definitely something that he will um, be using in his campaign. Um, Now I have CNN open, and you see a headline that says that herd immunity is impossible. You also see a headline that the virus can float in the air, right? Which is something that experts claim, right? You also see that the US is in a free fall. Everything is really about the corona, and not very positive, maybe about the economics part. Um, Now, if we have to be critical, it might be because the CNN is more democratic and it wants to look at the bleak things. But on the other side, it might also be that it is telling us, hey, maybe we should focus on the crisis that we have in hand instead of being too optimistic about what we see in the stock market. Maybe it's also maybe the CNN is also more for the people, right? Because we are seeing a diversion between the real economy and the stock market. So there's a lot of things here that play a role. But if we look at the headlines, it is about the Corona crisis. Well, at least it is the Corona crisis that are filling these headlines. Uh, yes. If we, on the other hand, look at Fox, we see nearly nothing about the corona crisis, which is quite significant. We see mostly here about the Epstein, which I'm really not going to go into because that does not relate to anything about economics. The only interesting thing here is mostly how there is a difference between the news media in the US, how it is so significant, the difference of what they report on. And lastly, we see here, this is the BBC, and we see that there might be a new infectious disease outbreak in China. Um, we we also see that China is warning the UK over Hong Kong interference. It's mostly, as I see here, more Chinese related, um, and of course also UK related. Um, the news about China warning the UK is significant here because the UK has taken a step to condemn some human right violations and this is not here on the front page, but something that I read previously today, that the UK has denounced the human rights violations in Saudi Arabia and North Korea, and uh, among others also China, right? So there is some conflict now, geopolitical conflicts between China and the UK, and of course there also exists one between China and the US, as we've seen, because of Trump's rhetoric and maybe also the actions that he's taking, but mostly his rhetoric because his actions are not quite significant against China. We also didn't see eh, that the US has not really intervened in Hong Kong. They have just said that Hong Kong mm, is not sovereign anymore, right? Um, However, the UK, if you recall, a couple of days back, Boris Johnson went out and said that he would be open to accepting refugees coming from Hong Kong. So the UK is really standing up for Hong Kong more than I think at this point from the news that I'm getting than any other country. And that of course also makes sense because it was um, a UK colony that was given to China. So the UK is really the one responsible here for the Hong Kenyan people. One could argue, right? They promised them something, but now there is a violation in that treaty, and if the treaty is between uh, China, the People's Republic of China, really, um, and and the UK, then it is those two that will be in conflict with one another. So yes, that was the news. Um, and I think the question that I have from last time, we might discuss that after the interview. I think it's more significant um, and more valuable to have the interview right now. And I know that. Hi, Silvio. Yes. Hello. And I know that Silvio wants to talk a little bit about. Ooh, he wants to talk a little bit about. Um, he wants to talk a little bit about Adam Smith because we've discussed that him and I previously, and we had um, some ideas that were not quite aligned. And Silvio is a friend of mine from high school, and if can get this to work, um, you can see here how he looks, firstly, and secondly, um, that we first met. Um, well, we met at high school, but we really became friends when we both joined the MUN, and we had a lot of fun there, and that was really where we started to talk about politics, and we saw that we were both interested in the same things, and well, our friendship has aspired from that time, and we've kept in contact ever since. Um, and he is one of my best friends, definitely. So hi, Silvio. Yes, hello. How are you doing this evening?
I'm well. I just finished dinner with my family, and it's been yeah, it's been nice and a good day, a good chill day in July.
Yeah.
How about you? How's
Well,
it been?
well, it's been a good day today. I met up with a friend. I ate pulled duck, which I had missed a lot, and it tasted very good. And then we talked a little bit. Of course, when you meet people, we had not met for a long time, so if we discussed a whole range of things regarding the Corona crisis and how it is to be done with your thesis and things like that. Yeah.
Well, it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I've been listening to what you've been saying until now, and I think it's definitely there's definitely a few things that I'd like to comment about in relationship
Okay.
to how the Corona crisis and everything.
Yeah. Well, just go ahead.
Well, um, wait. Well, well, firstly, I would say that what's worth mentioning is that what what seems to be a health issue has obviously um, and quite clearly affected a society in a broader sense in many aspects, like not only economics but also just politics and how people make decisions and tolerance for risk, of course. And I think that's really worth mentioning because of course it has to do a lot with economics because I mean the the the, the the tolerance for risk that people take in their daily lives and also in businesses is outrageous how it affects economics and the economy as a whole. And um and the thing is that it's affecting individuals and individual businesses, but also as a whole. It's affecting the whole mentality of how we approach the consumption of services and goods, really. And it's interesting because it's changing to a new paradigm in the sense that we're prioritizing and choosing different ways to spend our money, and
Okay.
different philosophies about how to spend money and how we should or how we could instead spend money. And it's just very interesting because you see how people are starting to react to these extreme changes. Well, it might not be extreme changes for some people because you might have the same house that you had and the same job and blah blah. But it's not but it's at a deeper level. You could say that it's changing our mentality and how we interact with people and how we choose to well, like I said, as communicate and consume. So
Is there maybe an example from your personal life that you can tell us about?
Well, well, firstly, I would say that public transport is becoming at least not, maybe not now because it's been going back to normal in a way. Well, fortunately slash unfortunately, but I've seen that public transport has been something that people have been much more critical about using and how that has affected. I mean, besides the economics of it, also just the way that people interact because if you have a lot of people going in a bus or a train, it'll be a higher likelihood of people meeting other people by chance on a train ride. So
yeah, that's true.
So I remembered how one time I came down to Snowball here where my mom lives, and it was a day that it was in the middle of the Corona crisis, and I remember it was we didn't have, as you recall, Karim, we haven't had like a very strict lockdown in Denmark, really. But it was during the time where
I think a lot of people would disagree with you there, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people were trying to keep themselves locked down in a way as much as possible in a certain way, and so on. But it was a time where there weren't many people on the train, and I remember that it was much more. I started talking with this woman that is probably what I think she was like between 50 and 60 years old, and she just seemed interesting to talk with, really,
yeah.
and we're like practically the only people in the wagon on the train, and I remember striking up this conversation with her out of the blue because it just felt more natural because there weren't many people, and it was just and it was ironic how the fact that there were less people, it made me speak more. Or made me want to speak more to her more. I don't know. It was because of the circumstances and because of it was a long train ride or something, or just because that she just seemed like a nice person, or I don't know what it was, but it was something about how people perceive the absence of something, right? Because instead of having the abundance of people in places, you're like, well, all of a sudden you don't have people, and you all of a sudden, I don't know. I guess you appreciate more, or you appreciate people more because there are less of them around you, or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's something like that.
That's it's interesting, right? You could think if you have to put it into pure economics, it's supply and demand, of course.
Well, yeah, it's well, in the sense you could say that it's an economic. In economics, you could say that it's because well, I guess you could quote unquote the supply of people has increased the demand. In my experience, at least, has increased the demand of speaking to people.
Okay, but let me ask you a different question that also relates to what you're saying, right? With being together with people and things like that. Now we see that, and being together with others. In the Corona time, everything, at least here in Denmark, was shut down, such that you had a lot of free time. I think we can both agree on that front, right? You didn't have to go anywhere, so at least the transportation time was reduced to near zero. It means that you had a lot of free
Well,
time. Now, the question in that free
yeah,
time, do you think that people try to come closer to each other? In the sense that our friend group, for instance, had a Skype call, or at least a Facebook
yes,
call, right? But we had a call. Um, and we might not have had that had the Corona crisis not been here, right? We'd all have
yes,
the things that distract us. So, do you
yeah.
think that that is something that we might carry on with us even after the Corona crisis, or do you think that um, the the troubles of the everyday life will take over again, and the lessons kind of that we've learned from the Corona
Yeah,
crisis will not
lessons that we
will
take
cease
with
to,
us.
yeah, to be removed.
Well, I think that, I mean, I've always thought that and when I was studying economics in high school, I would say that I've always been someone that's argued that humans, well, that individuals, that we often react to, um, well, especially people that are in countries that are developed, right? Like in like first world countries, you could say,
Yeah.
um, that we react more to the absence of something. So so once we
Mm.
don't have the possibility of meeting with friends in real life, we also feel like we need to maintain this contact by reinforcing it some other way, right? So I think that the scarcity of the 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 the, uh, the immediate scarcity that we have of situations to interact with people make us want uh, to well, to keep these contacts, right? And I'm guessing that it somehow reacts somehow economically as well, in the sense that um, mm, probably Amazon and online shopping has increased like a shitload, probably, um, to the extent that yeah, that people realize that, well, hey, we can't shop or we can't consume, and all of a sudden we want to keep our consumption up, and it's this reaction to this immediate yeah, this immediate absence of possibilities, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is the scarcity, right? There is only two left in the store. Get it now, or you will never be able to get it, right? And you might trick
Exactly,
your
exactly.
brain to take it. Yes.
And then
Yeah, that's a
and then of course
marketing
then of course you
strategy.
can
Yes.
see mm, and then you can see that, like, the more obvious, or the more how do you say it, direct economic things, which is, like, for example, how the toilet paper consumption is, well, the toilet paper uh, um, not consumption necessarily, but the purchasing of of toilet paper and flour and yeast has,
Yeah.
has increased because people are have more time, and well, hey, what are we gonna do with all this time, right?
Yeah.
Let's bake, right? Um, mm, so so in that sense, I guess that it's the more economic and more uh, obvious economically um, effects of the corona crisis, in terms of, in the sense that we react to absence of something, right, or the
Yeah.
or the lack of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
So
don't know. I mean,
that's an interesting thing because what I understand now, it, from what you said, that is maybe that. Okay, Silvio, I can hear myself. Can you maybe I don't know,
I
put
don't know.
put
I
the
don't know why
phone
you're on
on
speakerphone.
what? Okay, now it's perfect. Well,
Okay.
I really I am a little bit skeptic when it comes to us having learned from the Corona crisis. Um, of course, if it lasts for longer, yes, maybe the things that we'll learn will be more long term and sustainable. But regardless, the short term things, I'm a little bit scared that those are things that we hope we can keep with us, but we won't, right? So, for
Yeah.
instance, the alcohol in the shops, it's quite good to have those, Like I would recommend shops to have those, regardless if they're existing a pandemic or not, just to also limit the normal cold, right? Um, and normal illnesses and infections, skin infections, for instance, right? But yeah, I think if there's no laws that that tells those shops to have those alcohol bottles at the entrance, they won't have them, um, and they will try to pack this. We see now, at least here in Aarhus, that the shops. It's not that they have limited shelf space; they just have removed some of the shelves to create more space, so people don't have to come very close to each other, right? I think that's pretty good, um, at least now in the pandemic time. But I'm quite sure that they will go back to having full shelves and as close shelves as possible after the pandemic is over. Of course, that is assuming the pandemic is going to be over at some point, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing is that the thing actually something interesting about they mentioned alcohol and our weaknesses or illnesses or whatever, right? Um, I bring this back to psychology because I think
Okay.
that it has a psychological like a psychological impact that you can relate to economics, which is that um well you probably could imagine that addictions have probably been strengthened during the Corona crisis because
Hmm.
um think that for example let's take the basics, let's take alcohol and cigarettes, right? um and we say, well, now that people have had more time alone, um they probably resort and they more time alone and less time busy
Yeah.
at work or something. Then mm, that there's been an increase in consumption of alcohol and cigarettes because there's more time free, so people smoke more and drink more, and addictions have been strengthened in that sense,
Yeah.
right? And and then you could say that in the macro perspective, you could say that social services are probably going to be more busy because of these addictions, uh, uh yeah,
Yeah,
how do you
for
say
me,
it?
I see it as mental health in general, right? That might have deteriorated in these times. Um,
Exactly.
however,
So the
yeah,
psychological point, so I would say that, yeah, that I bring it back to psychology because, well, I mean, because the thing is that it's interesting because you see how people have been reacting either either been trying to find a new lifestyle by quitting these addictions, right?
mm,
Or they've tried to or they of course strengthen these addictions by
yeah,
consuming more of it,
yeah,
of these substances, right?
yeah,
And as a result, I guess, like I said, as a result, probably in the long run, there'll be a higher consumption in social of well higher expenditure in social services because of AA meetings and
yeah,
different programs that are designed to quit it to cut addictions, right, or to to eradicate these problems, right?
definitely,
Um, and
definitely.
and I think that this will make a big impact because you'll see how people either individually or collectively
Mm,
they'll try to either um, find a way to maintain these addictions or they'll try to avoid these addictions, right?
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
and I think it's really
How I see it is that um, the Corona crisis and the isolation um, have hit people differently, right? You have some that have become more challenged in the way that they might have developed these new addictions and mental health disorders. And those people might have already had these mental health disorders before, but not extreme, right? And then you have people that have tried to get rid of these innovation and these mental health disorders, and they have maybe become very successful. And you have maybe some people that have started to innovate. So I'm, and I know this is not, I'm not going to get famous by saying this, but I sit on TikTok. I like TikTok. I think it's a very fascinating application, and you see that more and more people have been using this app and being more and more creative, right? So on the one hand, yes, we've created more mental health, but I think we've also created, on the positive side, more innovation. And my idea is here that maybe this phenomena of the corona, it's not a phenomena, but this situation, this exogenous shock that has hit the world, it has created some extremes, right? It has gone into the
Yeah,
individuals and then showed the extremes of those individuals, right? Are you a procrastinator?
yeah,
Then you will procrastinate even more. Are you a productive person? Well, now you have the time to be even more productive.
yes.
Yeah, that's that's personally what I think, and I think that's also what. Yeah, I don't know. Is that also how you feel, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's but then again, these extremes will be determined not only by the economics and the and the crisis that we're in, but also by how personality reacts to the two.
Yeah, yeah, definitely,
And
definitely.
I don't know. I mean, it might be a time where personality will be more appreciated, or will be more taken into consideration.
Yeah. Okay, so yesterday, as per usual, as I think you heard in my introduction, I usually read a part of Adam Smith, and I know that that's one thing that you specifically requested when I called you this afternoon, um, and I think it's a good point to start where I left off yesterday. So yesterday I was reading about, and I had just started a new chapter that is called, I'm just going to take the book out, it's called Of the Accumulation of Capital, or of Productive and Unproductive Labor. And the part that I read was about the value of labor, right? You have some people that are doing labor that are productive, and some labor is unproductive. It's not unproductive in the sense that it is destroying wealth, but in the sense that it is not producing something that can be traded. So, and the example that Adam Smith comes up with is, look at people working in farms and people looking in working in a factory. Well, those two are producing something that can be traded: food, and food or milk, for instance. And those working in the manufacturing businesses are producing, let's say, shoes, for instance, right? So those are creating things that are productive. However, people that are working in non-productive sectors is maybe a servant. Um, it's also something that is quite well, that has a high social value for us, but is still worthless, right? Such as the military. The military does not produce something that is really tradable in the labor in the commodity market, and therefore it's also perceived as unproductive. And another thing that we also that he also discusses is, hello.
Yes.
Okay, good. And the part that I really want your input on, and I think we will have some discussions about this, because we have talked kind of about something close to it. He brings up the idea of a farmer that works on a farm. However, he does not own the farm himself, right? The farmer himself produces productive labor, and the owner maybe produces the management of this farm. However, that is unproductive labor. And the
Yes.
question, and his question is, well, it's not really a question, but his argument is that the productive labor that is produced by this worker, or this farmer, has to be enough to sustain both individuals,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
for for
it's
for for the economy to work, right? and for both of them to be able to exist, because otherwise one would die. Um, and I then developed upon that idea and asked the question, well, that's very nice, but the question is really how, and the question that I wanted to ask you is really, well, what kind of division are we going to make? Because I know that you're interested in that.
Between the interest, difference between what?
How do we make the division of the product of the land, right?
Well, it's. I think. I mean, personally, I mean, this is up to school of thought and opinion. But I personally am of the opinion that we have to do it by taxation.
Okay. Let me put it more simply. Usually in this podcast, I use the example of bananas. So let's assume that this farm produces bananas, right?
Yes.
And there's 100 bananas. Should it be 50-50 split? Should it be such that there is a government that comes in, takes all the banana, and then it decides how it will um, give it to the two, divide it between the two? Or should the owner get all the bananas and then he gives the farmer the bare subsistence and a small profit for the work? Or should it be the opposite, that the farmer lies and he keeps and tries to keep as many bananas as possible, but only enough such that the owner is willing to rent him the land the next period, right? It is a very simple example, but it's so intricate.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that well, my opinion is that it should be 50-50.
Yeah.
But then the thing is that the landowner, of course, has the ability to invest some of these 50 bananas to create.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, so the 50-50 is of course temporary in the sense that the landowner, the landowner has the ability to, or the power and the position to well the abilities required to invest these bananas into planting more banana trees, right?
Well, the idea is that he cannot do anything with the bananas just for his own consumption, and it's he just rents the land out to the farmer.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you didn't, the argument that we had the other day was that, so if Adam Smith considers that an owner of an apartment, let's say, he's renting the apartment out to some people that are renting it, right?
Yeah.
You can consider the income that he gets from the renting. You can consider it as a part of the GDP, and I agree. But then you could also just transfer this argument into labor. So if the worker doesn't own the factors of production, then then you're basically considering that the landowner is or the owner of the company is renting out the factors of production to the worker. And if you use the same argument, then you're like, well, so can you consider the CEO's revenue revenue from renting these factors of production as GP? And I don't know. I mean, it's then you go into macroeconomics and how much, well, to what extent the government has a say in this, right? But
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
but I think that the key point is the key question is who decides who keeps what.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the thing is that there are a lot of people that argue that it should be the owner, or it should be the government. Other people say that it should be distributed equally, and that's it. Or
Yeah.
it's different. It's different opinions, of course, but I don't think that the I mean, I'm economically, I'm probably leaning towards a Marxist in a way, because I think that the government should divide the revenue and the GDP, and well, basically the wealth in into into not equal, because of course you have to have some, as in there's not, I'm not saying that everyone should earn the same amount of money, but more like that there should be enough disposable income for both the
Yeah.
worker and the landowner, so that they both can live.
Yeah.
And it's and the thing is that it's not like, yeah, so the 50-50, like I said, it's temporary. So it's not like the other landowner will have 50 for his whole life, or that he'll be earning 50 bananas his whole life. But it's more like, well, he'll earn 50 as long as the worker earns 50. But then if he is able to increase his revenue by hiring another worker and planting more trees, then he might earn 70, and the workers might stay at 60 or whatever, right? So it's more like a step towards a higher existence, in the sense that you well, higher how to say it, status. So the thing is that it comes down to how you want to evolve as a business, as a country, and as an individual. So yes. So what is the argument behind? I mean, we know the arguments behind neoliberalism and socialism and all this,
Yeah.
but it's more like, um, what is more efficient, and we're not only more efficient, but what's more how to say it, what's more beneficial for society as a whole. Because if the worker can pay for, I mean, let's say this country doesn't have free education like Denmark has, but it has more like of an American society, right? Where the worker has to accumulate wealth to be able to pay for his sons or daughters' education. And so the point is that eventually the worker will have enough money, as in the government has to ensure that if they don't have a free education like Denmark has, then they have to ensure that the worker eventually has the money to pay for the children's education. And if they don't, then it's not only bad for the worker, but it's also bad for society, because then you have less people that are educated, and less people that can take decisions about these things, and it goes into a huge circle, right? Like where you come into an evil cycle.
Yeah. Definitely. That
So
makes perfect sense.
so
Eh,
it's
yeah. It is again. It comes down to politics and to what is it really that the people want, right? Um, and who decides the
yeah. Well,
government? Yeah. Or is it just a bargain between those two? And then the question becomes, well, who has the strongest bargaining position? Uh, is it the farmer, or is it the one who owns the farm, right? What's the usefulness of the person who owns the farm, right? Is the question. What kind of value does he add? Well, in the sense we can try to say, well, maybe he is the protector of the farm, right? Maybe he's the military person that we're talking about, that produces unproductive labor, but he is producing something, right? Because he's producing security such that the farm doesn't get stolen from some barbarians, or get burnt down by the competitors. Um, so yeah, it comes down to evaluating the value of having an owner of the farm. Um, yeah, and really that was just my extension of what Adam Smith was talking about. What Adam Smith was mostly talking about was the idea that this guy has to produce enough for both to sustain himself and the people that are unproductive. So really, the productive laborers are producing more for society, really, and yeah, and that is that is
Yeah, well, I
uh,
mean,
that is
in the
that is
long run,
true.
as I say, this distribution of wealth affects the long term as a collective.
Yeah,
And it's a yeah, it's not only because the landowner will earn less than he could, but it's more like he's getting 50 instead of all 100 bananas in the beginning because eventually he'll be thankful for the fact that he only got 50 because he'll have more competent workers eventually that are educated enough to be able to pick bananas, right?
yeah,
So it's not even only beneficial for the collective and for the worker, but it's also beneficial for him or for her, right?
yeah,
For the landowner, right?
yeah. And we might even be talking percentage wise, right? Not because he might get 50% of the example was just 100 just to make it easy, but we might be saying 50% of the bananas, right? And if the worker can invest some of his bananas into or trade those to get better education on how to grow bananas, then maybe it will be 1,000 bananas next period, right? Which will be beneficial for them both. And really, you also, I'm just going to open that camera because there is something that I have to show you. I have to use my hands to explain this. Um, you don't have to open the camera if you don't want to. But this question is something that I like to talk with other people about, and it relates to the distribution. Oh, hi. It relates to the distribution of wealth in a society. So you definitely know Margaret Thatcher, I suppose, and
Yes.
yeah, Ronald Reagan, and in that period we had a larger disparity, well, an increasing disparity between the rich and the poor, and an increasing wealth gap, right? And her argument to justify that, right? I think you've seen this before. That would you rather have this, right? So that's a distribution. This is the lowest individual, the wealth of the lowest or of the poorest individual in the society, and this is the richest. Would you rather have this, or would you want to have this, right? And she says that the latter is better than the first one because everyone is better off. Now, a lot of people do argue with or do agree with her on that front. Um, when I talk to other people, I'd like to highlight the fact that this means a higher. Um, yes, yes, you are richer, and let's even assume that inflation has not increased, right? So everyone is really richer and can buy more. However, there is a larger disparity between the richest and the poorer, such that the society, and here I'm talking maybe more about the mentality of the people, uh, it becomes more diverse, right? And here I mean the bad diverse thing, that they don't live in the same cities now. They want to to live in different parts of the city. They go to different schools and things like that, right? Because some people can afford something that is much better than the other, and disconnected. They become more and more. The society becomes more and more disconnected. Okay, I cannot hear you. The mic.
Well, the thing is that it's interesting because what happens is that there might be more of a diversity in ways of investing money and ways of prioritizing their expenditure of money. However, there's also well, as you said, it's probably a negative diversity in the sense that there will be a diversity as a product of ignorance, right?
Yeah.
So if there's hey, if there's more room for being ignorant and not prioritizing things that matter in one's life to invest money in.
Yeah.
Um, then you're not. Then I mean, it might be positive in the sense that well, you have people that are investing in many different things, right? But in the long run, as you said, in economics, it's just interesting to think about in the long run that how this will impact a society at a larger scale and during a longer time. And I really don't think that the diversity in different areas in which people invest their money in will be better if there's less education and there's less educated how would I say it educated priority value. Right? So yeah, so it might be better for like different businesses because all of a sudden the niches of society, like the different very specific things that people want to invest in, like ecological goods or I don't know certain things that very specific groups of people want to invest will increase, and that's fine. Hey, that's fine, but that's only thinking about the positive things, like ecological things, ecological food, and how would I say it? Let's say I don't know. Self-realization programs and yoga and meditation programs and whatever, and all these different healthy things that you would call it. But on the other hand, you'll be like, well, people will be using their money in stupid ways, like I don't know, like investing it in let's say bingo. I don't know, like different things that might not be as as
Yeah.
as beneficial for society. Even. So it's like so then what is the risk? What is the risk of having this diversity?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think that this risk is worth taking if you don't have well for starters you don't have a proper security network in the sense that you don't have a good education basis or healthcare, for example. Like
Yeah.
what if you have people that can't afford healthcare but that are diabetic and go to McDonald's every day or whatever? It's just like to what extent is this diversity positive?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you, but the idea. I think I have to turn off the camera
Yes.
because there's something with the voice. Is it better now? Yeah, it's much
Yes.
better. Yeah. So the idea was that everything becomes cheaper, so more people can go to schools, and then more people can afford healthcare and things like that. We don't assume the inflation to have had any effects, right? It's just the difference that more people can have luxury products, right? So now there exist some products that are more luxurious than would have otherwise existed. And actually, this relates to a discussion that I had. If you heard me at the beginning, I have had another interviewee, uh, Omar, and we talked a little bit about we talked about this difference also, and what we or the things that we kind of talked about might would be that rich people would now also have a moral standpoint, right? They they would maybe they could afford to be more environmentally friendly, eat healthier options, consume yeah again in more environmentally friendly things, and that would mean that I'm gonna refer to it back a higher moral standpoint, and suddenly you don't only have a wealth gap, but you also have a moral standpoint difference between groups in the society, right? So now
Yeah.
the poor people are looked down on, not only because they are poor, but also because they have a different moral standpoint. And if you make that not on a macro level, but on an international level, um, we see that that is kind of what's happening, right? We see that Now, rich countries, I'm going to refer to those as as Europe and the US. Well, well, maybe mostly Europe, not the US that much. But we're talking about taking care of the environment, right? That is one
Mhm.
of the highest things on our agenda at this point. However, when we look
Yes.
at countries such as China and those countries in the east Southeast Asia and maybe also in Africa, we might condemn them a little bit for maybe taking more oil out of the ground and trying to become richer, right? And for me,
Mhm.
we're both richer, right? So we can afford to do things that are maybe more morally sustainable, I think. But we're condemning those nations because they are not taking care of the environment, right? However, we're not considering the
Mhm.
fact that they are actually poorer and they cannot afford to take care of the environment. So we're shunning them in a
Mhm.
way. And that relates
Mhm.
back to the gap, right? To the gap existing between the rich and the poor, leading to moral differences. And it would be nice
Yeah.
to see what you think about that.
Well, yeah, I think that yeah, I agree. That it's partially about time and money that are available for each person to be more environmentally friendly. But at the same time, I think that it's it's also the other way around in the sense that well, so in the case of China, you can't really apply it to it because
Yeah.
it's a even if they're even if the even if the wealthiest and the poorest is like has like a huge difference. I would say that also uh, countries that are not like China, that are more like, I don't know, like different African countries that might not contaminate as much or not have the ability to contaminate as much because of lack of resources. Um, there might be a certain amount of positive thing of there might be a positive aspect of being a poor country in the sense that, well, if you don't have people consuming as much as uh, um, consuming products that are bad for the environment, then you also have a situation where because of the fact that they're poor, they're able to contribute less to the negative things to the environment, right?
Yes, that is true.
So
But is that
so so
fair?
so what?
But is that fair?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Isn't that
well,
kind of a
I don't know if it's fair, but
privileged
I don't know if it's
opinion
fair.
that
But
you
we're talking
say
about the environment now.
just stay poor because then you're not contributing to the dirtiness of the earth, kind of.
Exactly, exactly. So so the thing is that um,
Yeah.
and this brings me to my argument about how this environmentally friendly movement, this environmental movement, has to not only take the time and the energy and the money uh, to invest to invest in environmentally friendly programs and how do I say it, products and things and just yeah, just programs and movements and organizations, but also also take in consideration that what, well, in my opinion at least, is that to be more environmentally friendly doesn't mean that we need more economic growth, and and I think that probably in many cases it's the opposite, that we have to stop growing, as in
Ooh.
not stop growing in the sense that we have to stop evolving, but more like, well, do we really want more economic growth in the sense that we want more factories contaminating? If
Well,
economic growth means that we open more factories and that we open more mines and more let's say I don't know, uh, that we produce more cars that have a high I don't know, that yeah, produce more cars and more and burn more things and
hmm,
you know, like higher consumption, higher higher waste. So to what extent is economic growth going to save us from environmental disaster? Uh, it's like
It's a very interesting
so
viewpoint. So you feel content with the amount of consumption that you're consuming, I assume, at this point.
yeah, of course. I mean, I think that the
Yeah.
people. I mean, sure. I mean, I'm not saying that you stop buying things because hey, because we all need a new telephone. We need a new how to say it. We need food, obviously, and different things to survive, and that's fine. But I mean, what I mean is that this mass consumption and mass economic growth that we're constantly praising because it's making our economy better, apparently.
Yeah.
And I agree to a certain extent it does, but what I'm not. But what I'm saying is that does it really? I mean, just because it benefits the economy, does it benefit the environment?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
I
it's
see your
it's.
point
I mean,
there. Yeah.
it's something to think about. It's something to think about because you're like, well, yeah, sure. If the economic growth comes from a good place, we're consuming more uh, electric cars instead of gasoline cars, and you invest more in planting trees, or you invest more in it all depends. It all depends on what you
But
decide
now
to invest in.
you're assuming that everyone has the same level of let's call it materialistic consumption, right? Um, you're
Yes.
assuming that, but the thing is that people in countries such as Africa, we know that they're not as economically um, wealthy as we are, right? In the sense that they
Hmm.
need more food production, they need even the basic factories, right? To produce shoes,
Hmm.
for instance, and produce clothes and produce cars, right? You're saying we don't need more cars, but they don't even have the cars, and people down there might not even be able to afford the cars, right? Um, and
Well,
the question would then
this
be:
is where.
are you? I just want to understand where you're getting at. Is what you're saying? Is it? And this is putting it very black and white. And I know that this is not how you think. But are you saying, okay, um, let them also not? Mm, okay, let me not put it like that. But let them also not develop that much, because otherwise they will also contribute to 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 the environment, badly to the
Well,
environment.
no. No. Well, I think that okay. So this is where I think about this is where my what I meant was that also that this economic growth is not necessarily bad, but it's because we choose to make this economic growth
Yeah.
be in something harmful.
Yeah,
So if we all of a sudden if we all
yeah.
of a sudden like if we all of a sudden encourage developing nations to have economic growth that they need, but but grow in a healthy way from the start, um, then I think that it would be much more beneficial than we just say, well, hey, start with your factories, start with your cars, start building tons of houses, and blah blah, and then that just consume, just make waste. So I mean, so yeah, so I mean, of course, developing nations need growth and economic growth, and they
Hmm.
do need. But I don't think that's the same as saying as in I don't think that it, that 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 um, that excludes the possibility of economic development.
The question
Um,
is though, let's assume a country like Nigeria, because I know they have a lot of oil. For them, it's much cheaper just to drill, get some oil, and thereby have energy to produce things in factories, than to buy state of the art windmill, right? Or solar panels, because it's an African country and they have a lot of sun down there, right? Those are not economically well, they are economically feasible, but they are not economically efficient uh, production entities of growth for that country. They can be more efficient if they just dig a hole and take that up. would you personally
Mm-hmm.
condemn them if they did that, right? If they said, oh, no, we don't care about the environment, we want economic growth, and this is the cheapest and most efficient way for us to do it by digging more holes in the ground and taking up this fossil fuel.
Ha, well, that's just thinking that, well, the easiest way is the best way, but I think that's not always the case. So just because it's easier doesn't mean that it's better.
Okay.
So like, just because it's easier for me to, I don't know, I don't know, I think that that efficiency is not always beneficial. Um, like, let's say, let's take the production of, like, smartphones. It might be very, very efficient for us developed nations to to uh, to have a production of iPhone of smartphones in China and in sweatshops in Asia and Africa, but is that really the healthiest and the best outcome, that will lead to best outcome? Because, I mean, yeah, sure, it's very efficient, and it's very practical and very easy for us, because, hey, well, hey, they don't have any laws that prohibit 16-hour shifts without breaks, and
Yeah.
at a precarious wage and everything. But and it's very efficient and it's very easy, right? But doesn't mean that it's always the best way, because, hey, I mean, what about the benefit of the environment everywhere? So it's not only like, well, oh, well, we're just isolated here because, well, we can do something about it because we have solar panels and we have windmills and blah blah, and
Mm.
we have to invest in all this. But it's more like, also like, well, hey, just because just because it's easier for us to have our pollution someplace else, our massive pollution someplace else that's not here, then what is? I mean, it's gonna still have the same outcome, which is just economic. I mean, not economic, but environmental disaster, and that's not. That's just postponing the inevitable, which is that something
Yeah.
will go wrong eventually,
Yeah.
because, well,
But
just because we're
yeah.
not doing it doesn't mean that's not being done.
Yeah, but I still. Ooh. Okay, much better now. Uh, the thing is, at the beginning you said it's more efficient. Um, since it is more efficient, this is what is going to be done, right? Um,
Uh-huh.
we will not. We're not going to try to make things less efficient, right? We
Mm-hmm.
might do things better if innovation leads us that direction, right? And of course also
Mm-hmm.
some laws maybe along the way, and maybe also valuing things, putting a price on things, right? So an argument is maybe that as we become richer, we might be willing to pay a premium for products that are more environmentally friendly. And I think a perfect example of that is maybe eggs, right? A lot of people are willing to buy more expensive eggs because the chickens have been treated better. A lot of people, or maybe also food in general, a lot of people are willing to pay an extra money here in Denmark, at least, for buying ecological things um, that have not been sprayed with pesticides, right? So
Mm-hmm.
for me, I think it's more innovation that will lead us to more environmentally friendly options rather than saying, well, let's produce less or let's do things less efficiently. Uh, because then if you want to force companies to do things, right? Because we economists, and I think also business people, we're gonna try to find the easiest way of doing things, and by easiest I mean also the cheapest. Um, in order to force those companies not to do things that are not environmentally friendly, in the case or in the scenario where there is no mm, cheap way, i.e., there's no innovative way of doing the environmentally friendly option, then you need laws that prohibit a lot of things. And for me, I don't like laws that much. I don't like when things become too complicated with laws. Uh, it becomes, in the
Well,
long term, not sustainable, and it becomes counterproductive.
the thing is that it's one of the it's one of the it's one of the big it's one of the big debates between debates about how democracy doesn't fit well with capitalism.
Okay.
Because what you're talking about is that of course these laws prohibit things, and I guess you could argue that it takes democracy away, or the freedom of choice away, right? But it points out how difficult it is to have a real democracy with an economic system that is like capitalism. So um,
But why?
because you have
Isn't
because
it
you have
isn't it the exact same thing? Capitalism
no.
is democracy in the commodity market. Democracy is capitalism in in the political market.
Well, okay, so um, I think that it's, I guess if you see it that way, it is the same thing. But I like to point out the fact that democracy, the fundamentals of democracy, has the intention to of benefiting the majority, right? And capitalism, in contrast, focuses on benefiting the minority. So how do you balance those two, right? And it's interesting because you can I mean, in my opinion, you can have a real democracy with capitalism, and that's because, well, you you have you have two classes. You have the political class and the upper class. The the class of society that is not even in politics. It's just it's people in banks, right? And it's really just it's difficult to say, because you can't say that the freedom of choice that people have of consuming what they want is just an effect of democracy. It's the consequence of having exploitation at various levels, and it's
Okay.
and I don't think it's fair that we have this type of idea that, oh well, now because I can buy avocados, and I can buy sushi, and I can have the choice of buying avocados or bananas or tangerines or
Mm-hmm.
let's say, I don't know, like potatoes here from Denmark, or I don't know where we want to talk about it, but anyway, but the fact what I mean is, my point is that we have these really just really, I mean, not that important choices that we make by consuming things, defined by exploitation, because we're exploiting people back in other countries for the sake of us having the choice of being able to have an avocado. And
That is true.
it's
That is true. But I suppose with innovation and
and
people getting richer, um, with time we will be, or at least more and more people will be conscientious about the choices that they make. Um,
oh yeah, definitely. No, and I'm not saying that it's completely bad that we get avocados from other people, from other countries, and it's fine, because hey, it's the
no.
it's
I
the
mean,
basic
maybe at some point
principles of.
people will not want to buy avocados because they see that they are exploiting other nations, right? Nations in South America,
Yeah.
and they will also see how much water is goes into producing them, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So what I mean is that, okay, so it's not bad that we take resources from other countries to have the choice, but it's more like because that's the basics of specialization, right? Like
Yeah.
you're good at farming, you're good at what do you call it, at having cattle, you're good at what do you call it, at planting fruit trees, you're good at whatever, right? Um, and that's fine. But the problem is that we try to get away with a cheaper price because we know that these countries don't have laws for this, and that is the perverse thing in my opinion. Because well,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, sure, get your avocados if you want, and shove them, yeah, eat them if you want, but it's not like, but don't think it's something that it's product of something positive. I mean, it's part of something positive in the sense that yeah, that hey, well we like to have a free trade market that hey that we can share different tastes and preferences and blah blah, right? But on the other hand, we can't ignore that the fact that well well we did it, we're able to have these avocados at these relatively low prices, let's say, because there's an exploitation going on.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah. I see your point,
I mean?
but that is also, I think, a privileged opinion. In the sense that
Well, it is.
you're assuming that we're exploiting, firstly, because you're not assuming the fact that they are willing to sacrifice the environment for their economic wealth.
Well, I don't think it's I don't think it's I don't think it's the average citizen of these countries that are okay with with.
Yeah, but that's also a privileged opinion, right? That you can say
Well,
that.
I don't know. I mean the thing is that what I mean is
If
that
they
yeah,
voted
well,
for capitalism in their country, um,
well
that
no,
is
but we don't know
maybe.
if they voted.
No, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just
But we
saying.
don't know if they voted.
I'm just saying, maybe if they want to, this is the way that this is the way they know how to earn money, and they don't value the
Well, that,
environment that much as we do, right?
hmm, I don't
They are
know.
willing
I
to
mean,
sacrifice that. If it means to, let's say that, let's make this a little bit black and white, right? One avocado for 1 kilogram of CO2, right? And you buy an avocado for $1. They're willing this CO2, they are willing to send that out in the atmosphere. They don't really care because they want the $1 that they can use to buy bread, which they really need and otherwise wouldn't be able to buy.
yes.
And the bread for them is more valuable than the CO2. At no point will the CO2 overvalue the value of bread for these people, unless we make those people also richer, such that
Mm-hmm.
they will value both things equally, or at least equally, such that they become indifferent between the two, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah, but by saying let's not buy from those countries, I'm a little bit afraid that we make those countries even poorer, right? That's what I'm afraid of. And then they are willing to go into more extreme measures, right? Like we see in Brazil with burning down the rainforest.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think that the thing is that we um the point is that we can't expect just because we invest, just because we give uh, uh, money to these developing nations, we can't expect them to invest it properly. And
Okay, let me
it's not
just, no, I have to ask you a question. By giving them, do you mean in programs, in social programs, or do you mean trade with them?
social programs.
Okay.
Um, I think that I mean we can't. So there's a saying in English that says you can uh don't don't give don't give a horse water, but give him bring him to the pond or something like that, right? So
Okay.
so so what I mean is that by giving these nations money, you're not gonna solve their problems. You're gonna solve their problems by introducing to a new financial system where they can organize their wealth and they organize their people.
Yeah.
And just because you give them billions of dollars doesn't mean that they'll invest it properly, and there won't be corruption, because
Yeah.
the problem is that that if you give them the stack of money, probably 90% of it will keep in one person's hands, right? And that
Okay.
doesn't
Yeah.
solve anything.
I see where. Yeah. I see that. I see your. Yeah.
And
Yeah. But now you're talking about political interference in those countries, and that is a little bit
well,
a tough discussion.
it
But
is.
yeah.
It is.
But I want to take
It's very.
a step even back, right? When you said don't give a horse water, bring him to the to the well or the pond. Um, what I would well, the metaphor I would use to this is, right, for my argument at least, is don't give a man a fish but teach him how to fish.
Yeah, that was the saying. That was the saying. Yes, that was the saying.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yes, because I confuse it with the saying that says you can bring a horse to water but not make him drink.
But those are two different things, right? Those are two different
Yeah, they're two different
metaphors
things.
for two different arguments.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
is don't give
Sorry.
them how I understood your metaphor was, uh, these social programs, well, they are intended for them to be more environmentally friendly. However, we have to make them want to be environmentally friendly themselves, right? Uh,
Yeah.
while the argument with the fish thing was that don't give them a fish in the sense that don't give them these social programs, but rather make them rich enough so that they care about the environment themselves. And I
Yeah.
know I'm
Well,
repeating myself with that
we can start
argument.
making a financial system.
Yeah, it's not a financial system. It's providing them with basic commodities such that they reach a wealth level where they start caring
Where they
about
have
the
the.
environment. Because what
Mm.
if we go to the very basic of it? Why do we care about the environment? Well, it is for the wish that our children and grandchildren can have a world, or maybe also the animals can have a world where they can live happy without wearing masks and without caring about how much oxygen is out in the atmosphere, atmosphere, right? But that is,
Mm.
but here we're making an implicit assumption that we will have grandchildren and great grandchildren even, while those people don't take for granted that they can have grandchildren. Let's, for instance, take a very extreme case: the people living in Yemen. They would never care about their grandchildren because their children are already starving. They would never care for the environment.
Yeah.
They would produce as much CO2 as possible in order to get just one loaf of bread.
Yes.
And of course,
Well,
with Yemen, it's about
that's a different
war,
argument.
but I just gave an example of a very poor nation with a very low amount of commodities that goes around.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I see your point. I see your point. But I don't think it's because they don't care. It's because they don't have the ability to care.
Yes.
As in, they don't have the not the ability. Sorry, they don't have the time or the energy to care. But if they could care, they would.
I'd like to hope so. I'd like to.
Well, yeah,
hope
of course they would. I mean, if they had the money and the commodities and the even the space,
yeah,
and the peace to care, then they would. Obviously, they would. I mean, I don't think anyone wants a global warming and disasters, right? I mean, no one wants it really. So yeah. Hey, Karim.
Yes.
It was really nice talking to you.
Yeah, we've also been talking for quite some time. Thanks very much for your time. I
Yes.
think this is your cue to leave.
Yes.
It's as always a pleasure. And before you leave,
Of
do you
course.
have any final remarks?
I think that well, my final remark is that there's a there's a way deeper there's a way deeper purpose to having equality, economic equality,
Mm.
that benefits everyone. And that's not only the Marxist, the typical Marxist opinion and argument, but it's more like also a deeper argument, which is that it requires much more. As in, Marxism is not only just a thought to have an economic equality just for the benefit of the worker, but also just for the long run of people. So if we want to really invest in our future, then we have to invest in something that is tangibly worthwhile, and it's something really just really I think it's really straightforward that it's not only about fairness but also about like just how to be sustainable, like how we how we make choices and how we how we prioritize different things to invest in, and it's not only about, and like I said, it's not only about making the worker more satisfied, but also in the long run, like do we really feel like having uneducated people, and or do we really feel like having people that can't decide if they want to be environmentally friendly or not? And all these things contribute to all these inequalities, this economic inequality creates this confusion and this fear of either, well, either environmentally friendly and my children die because I nitpick different things I want to consume, or do I want to play it safe and not be environmentally friendly? And I don't think that anyone should be put in that position. So I think that what the solution is the solution is very complicated. I don't know it, but I think a step forward would be to consider that just because it's easy doesn't mean that it's good.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah,
Thank you
thank
very
you so much
much
for thank you
your
so much
time.
for having me, and I hope I can come for another talk at some point in a future podcast, and yeah, I think it's an awesome initiative that you have going on, and I hope that people could enjoy my
Your insights, yeah.
limited insight as a person that doesn't study economics, but that is interested in.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hope that you have much luck with this podcast, and I'll be watching future episodes and past episodes that I haven't watched.
Oh,
so
thank you very much.
Good luck. So good luck, and yeah, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
I definitely did. Okay, Silvio, talk to you later then.
Thank you. Talk to you later then. See you.
Bye. So that was my good friend Silvio from high school, and as you saw, he has some different views than me. I have to go quick to the bathroom, have a small break, and I will be back quite soon. So yeah, I'm back now, and thanks for waiting for me. I really had to go to the bathroom, but also that gave you a small time to maybe digest the thoughts that Silvio gave us, which are quite informative, right? Because he has a different worldview. That's a definite. He also had his final remarks with respect to Marx, right? To saying that Marxism is about investing in the future and more than just about equality between people. I really have a lot of notes here about what we discussed, um, and maybe I can read some of them out and see the most important things, and maybe we can reflect upon these ideas, and definitely we might even be reflecting on those tomorrow. Additionally, it's worth mentioning that today it seems as if Adam Smith will not be joining us due to the already lengthy interview we had the pleasure of having with Silvio Castello. Um, yes, so we started out by talking about the health issue and the corona crisis, and really that is usually what we young people do nowadays when we meet each other, right? We talk about, well, how have you handled the corona crisis, and how how have you been coping with it? Have you been doing what have you been doing differently, right? And how have you been seeing what's happening in the society around you? And that led us to a discussion about maybe the corona crisis have made things come out of people, right? And here I mean their personality be be taken to the extremes, because um, you had a lot more free time. Um, you had a lot more time to yourself, but it could also be time with your partner. Something we did not discuss but is worth mentioning is that the violence in the households have increased, and the divorce rates have also increased in this period, right? Which means that and maybe also people that love each other have increased, right? So the idea, or maybe people that 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 now live together has increased, right? Um, Maybe also the marriages have increased. So I know that one of my friends actually recently got married. But the idea is that um, having time to yourself and to reflect upon yourself has really um, made it possible to think about, well, who am I really? On the extreme sides, you might have people that have developed addictions and increased mental health issues, maybe depression, anxiety, and things like that. But you might also have increased innovation, right? People that have maybe recently laid off and have all the time in the world will sit in front of their computers and uh, and learn new traits, take new courses, and the like. I know, for instance, that I have a friend that started to take a lot of online courses, even though that he was studying economics with me, but he had all this new free time, right? He could not go out, he could not meet up with friends and things like that. So he re-innovated himself, one could argue. Now, after that, we started talking about Adam Smith and the idea that there is productive and unproductive labor, and the example of the farmer that farmed the land, worked on the land. However, he did not own the land, thus that what he produces had to be split between him and the owner, or at least it had to sustain both of them. And then we talked about, well, how should the split of the product of that laborer and the land be split between those two individuals. And Silvio's argument was that it should be split 50-50, i.e. a fair split. um, and that is, of course, also the first thought that comes to mind without knowing the circumstances. However, one could, right, with a different mentality, have maybe said, well, what is it really that the farmer does? Maybe the only thing the farmer, maybe the trees already are there, right? So it's not actual farming, but maybe it's just trees, and maybe that farmer also has robots, such that he doesn't have to work, right? He only has to press a button and that's it. So those considerations were not made, which is not a bad thing, of course, and a 50-50 split should be done. However, he did say that it is going to be a temporary split, and the argument was that the capitalist, which is the owner of the farm, the guy who produces no productive labor, could maybe invest that further on, and that led us to more of a discussion of on capitalism, and who should actually decide this split in the first place, right? Because I just said, well, how would you split it, right? Or how do you think it should be split? But really, if you go deep down, well, who actually decides in real life? Um, and the thought was then, well, is it democracy? Is it the government? How should it be? Um, and that is something that we never reach a conclusion into. However, one could argue that it is the government job to at least, and I think that it was one of the things that we agreed upon. Um, the bare minimum subsistence should be given to both, and it is only the rest that we can start to discuss about. So maybe let's assume that the bare subsistence of the two is maybe 30, and let's say the farm produces 100 bananas, as we said with Silvio. Maybe you need 30 to have some bare subsistence, right? Just to stay alive, and to trade them with other people to maybe have bread and meat and things like that. The idea would be 30-30, and then you'd have 40 left, and it's this 40 that should then be discussed. It's not the entire thing that should be discussed, but only the excess product of the land, and the laborer, of course. And then we started talking about the environment, which was quite a lengthy discussion, and it all started with with the question, why evolve in the first place, right? Is it beneficial to continue to evolve? Is it beneficial to continue constructing new firms? Because the more we the more that the assumption was, the more firms, well, the more environmental harm will be done. And the idea was that maybe we don't want that, right? So maybe we should make some different investments, right? Not have firms, but maybe, yeah. We really never reached a conclusion on that, but we discussed that he, we should care more for the environment, and we should make investments that improve the human capital, right? Such that everyone is educated about things. My argument was, however, where it became where I thought diversions happened was when I said, well, that's a privilege, right? It's a privilege to be able to say that, because that is assuming that the bare subsistence is is matched, right? You cannot say stop production and let's do something else before everyone can eat and everyone can actually have the food that we are producing in the first place, right? And then and then it became a little bit more political in the sense that the question was more about the poor, or the discussion was more about poor nations, and should we, this is very harsh to say, but should we allow them to develop in a non-environmentally friendly way? And um, we we concluded two different things. Um, we discussed, at least, or we talked. We we argued for different things. Um, Easy is not always better, was the argument from Silvio's point of view. For me, it was more that uh, let them do whatever they have to do in order for them to reach this bare subsistence, and when they reach that point, they will then be able to um, have the luxury of saying, hey, I want a good environment, right? And that relates back to the idea of yesterday, that the utility of the individual consists of materialistic and non-materialistic objects. Um, the material Once the materialistic, because the utility function is concave, once the materialistic commodities or the materialistic utility has reached not it will not reach a peak, but at least it reach a point where the additional utility you gain from that is not very high. You will start to care about the non-materialistic things, right? You will you will make that trade-off at some point, and that is the point that we should have all people reach before we'll be able to care about the environmental truly, right? Such that we all agree upon this. Um, but that, of course, also related to a discussion about democracy that we had with Silvio, um, that democracy should benefit the majority. However, democracy with capitalism creates some conflict of interest, because capitalism, in a very rough sense, is about benefiting a minority. As Silvius said, this happens because of the accumulation of capital, right? And there are some people that will be at the very, very top. And that is also what we see in today's world. Um, and the, 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 the discussion then led us to talk a lot about avocados, and that we are exploiting other countries because they don't have the proper laws that care about the environment, right? Um, and my argument was then again that this might be a privileged opinion, in the sense that we assume that they would care about the environment and they are not exploiting the environment on purpose to produce these avocados to earn some money that they can use for their bare subsistence. And then we came up with, or we didn't come up with these metaphors, but um, uh, we try to metaphorically um, put this discussion in one phrase, and we came up with two. Don't give a horse water, but bring it to the pond, right? Which means that you should not force upon these nations. At least how I understand it is that you should not, in relation to the discussion, you should not force these nations to care about the environment, but bring them to a place where, or a mindset maybe, or um, give them the surroundings such that they would actually care for the environment. Um, and that makes good sense. And the other metaphor was that don't give a man a fish, but teach him how to fish. And the argument and my argument and that related to the idea that um, should not give those people or those poor people um, money in the form of environment programs such that they don't such that they have the bare subsistence and don't contribute to the to the environment. Mm, they don't contribute badly to the environment. However, you should make them be able to have their bare subsistence and then them wanting not wanting to take care of the environment. And I think that both metaphors have that in common, that uh, i.e. Silvio and I have in common the idea that the people living in those countries somehow need themselves to realize that their environment is important, and that's the only way we can get them on board on this idea. However, how we reach that point is quite differently, because I'm more of a think subjectively, maybe. However, I always try to be objective in these podcasts, but of course I will never be able to fully succeed in that, and that is maybe also a good thing. Um, I believe that we need more innovation in order to reach that, and I would be willing to allow, if I was a dictator, to allow these people to rule. I put in very black and white concepts, maybe ruin their environment in a short period in time, such that they reach the point where they have the bare subsistence, and they would then themselves care about every single half a year. Every time there comes a new phone, I want that new phone. Let's remove that ideology, right? So it's more of an ideological um, um, undertone that Silvio's argument has. It's the idea, and he said it himself, Marxism: invest in the future, and make something that is sustainable, right? Um, let's have um, a world where we do not need to use all the resources in order to be happy. Let's be happy with what we have, and if that is the case, well, the environment will take care of itself. Where the argument that I have, and maybe the economic argument, is that you cannot really remove this um, inherent demand of that people have uh, to be better, and um, to demand more and more things, and therefore just give them those things, or give them enough things such that they start caring about other things as well. They start caring about um, the environment as well. Now, the argument here falls apart a little bit. The capitalistic argument that I've just said falls a little bit, because it's not for sure that they will at some point care about the environment. They might never care about the environment, and what would you then do, right? And that's something that I have personally not thought of. But clearly, Silvio's argument is not prone to this criticism, because it goes to argue that we you don't really need these things, right? You just need to be have more human capital, grow in a different direction, instead of only growing in economic terms, right? And that, I think that's also what Omar was trying to say. Don't grow, don't grow economically, because growing economically needs inherently more demand. Um, However, grow in a different direction that might not, at the point that we live in, at this 20 at this date, um, the 7th of July 2020 um, not be sustainable, or not be able to be measured in the GDP, so grow differently, maybe more education, uh, maybe more trees, maybe uh, more environmentally friendly produced phones, as example, as one of the examples that we had. So what I'm gonna boil all the things that Silvio said down to is that easy is not always better, right? He said that in the at the beginning, he said that in the middle, and he said that at the end. Easy is not always better. Just because it's easy to grow economically, and right now, maybe it's not the best thing for the long run, right? And that is definitely um, something to think about, right? And also, at the very end, I think this is what I'm going to end with. This podcast has really been long, one of, I think, the longest one that I've had so far. It relates to the question we that we had from last time, which reads out: how does the behavior of individuals and state differ when they have a short-term or a long-term view, right? So if we use today's interview to answer this, uh, the individual thinks about it in the short term. Um, if he thinks about the short term, well, then he will demand more and more things, um, right? And he will care about his consumption today, not care about it tomorrow, and the sustainability of this consumption. Um, for the individual in the short term, as we said with the avocado farmer in South America, for instance, he will be willing to trade the CO2 with the loaf of bread, or the dollar that he receives and that he can trade for a loaf of bread. However, if he had the long-term view, he might think that, okay, if there's too much CO2 out there and a lot of people are doing the exact same thing, well, that is not going to be sustainable, because at some point I will not be able to produce these avocados anymore. So he will do something else. Maybe he won't produce avocados, but produce something that is more sustainable. Maybe he would produce half as many avocados and half something else, that is that takes out the CO2 out of the environment, and yeah, and does something else, or produces water, right? We know that avocados use a lot of water, so something that produces water. Um, so that's for the individual. Now, when it comes to the state, if the state thinks short term, as the example that I proposed, with Nigeria, just saying, okay, let's uh, make some holes in the ground, let's take out some oil, and let's sell that all, or let's power all our factories with that oil, rather than have solar panels and wind turbines. If that's the case, or okay, that is actually the answer to the question. If they think short term, that is what they would do. Excuse me. Uh, yeah. So that is the answer. That is the answer. If they are short term, that is what they would do. If they think long term, they would go for the windmills and the solar panels, to power their factories. The question then becomes, right, which I'm always gonna go back to: when is it that individuals and countries think short term and think long term? In my opinion, and I think I've stressed this multiple times, and or mentioned it multiple times, but let me stress it out again. You think short term when you don't believe in the long term. That's the idea that you need to have your basic uh, materialistic demands filled. You don't want to feel hungry or thirsty. You also want to have shelter and a house, and clothes, right? So once those things are fulfilled, you're willing to think about, well, what about tomorrow? What about the day even the day after that and the day after that? What about the next generation and the generation after that and that and that? And I think that also relates to um, how countries are structured. So in Denmark, you have and we've talked about this, the overlapping generational model, while in other countries you don't have that. In Denmark, you have it because one generation trusts the next generation. However, in Middle Eastern countries, for instance, you don't have these contracts because you don't trust the next generation, right? You might not be willing to invest in education because you could just as well save that money for pension. But if you're willing to invest it in education today, those individuals then become adults, they would have more money, and then they would be able to pay you even a higher pension. But that doesn't happen because the old generation today does not, or the older, um, the adult population today don't trust the young generation, right? That's what's happening um, in countries that don't have an overlapping generational model. Now, I think it's time to end. However, I don't have a question yet for next time. So let's try to think of one. And I think the most significant thing is the easy better trade-off. Um, but that again relates to the short term and the long term view. However, let's maybe think of it differently and then ask why, how, and when do people innovate, right? Why, how, and when do people innovate, i.e., take the difficult uh, route instead of the easy one. In other words, is it true, and when is it not true that easy is not better? So I think that's the question. How or why, how, and when do people innovate, i.e., take the difficult route instead of the easy one? In other words, is it true? Is it true, and when is it not true that easy is not better? So basically, the statement of easy is not always better, and relate that to innovation, right? So thanks for your attention, and again, thanks Silvio for being my guest today. Um, I'm just gonna quickly see if we have any Q&A, any questions. We don't. Therefore, I'm going to end the stream. Uh, I'm gonna end the stream. However, as always, I can't just leave you like this. It's time for the motivation. And today's motivation relates to one of the characteristics of the podcast, which is to be open minded. I personally wear glasses, but maybe this is a metaphor for how I see the world, right? If I take it off, do I see the world differently? Well, I see it more blurry, but in the metaphor, I might see it entirely different. Maybe we all are wearing glasses. We're all wearing something that makes us see the world. And it's these ideologies that we have, it's these values that we have. So you really need to know your values, firstly, right? And secondly, you need to know that you have values, right? And you need to be able to accept that other people have other values. You need to be able to wear, I suppose, and here I don't recommend this for people, for physically for people, but mentally, try to wear other glasses, because other glasses might fit you even better. Maybe for some people it would even be better to not wear glasses at all. I don't have a specific worldview, right? But just be able to walk around and critique everything, and be open to anything, right? When you're wearing glasses, you want to be more focused about upon one thing. However, they also limit you to some degree. And here, this is the metaphor. So the uh, so the motivation here is that you should be aware of the glass that you're wearing, and be able and know that you're wearing glasses. So be open-minded. Be open-minded, listen to other people, and know that they are wearing different glasses. So talking to Silvio, I think today it was very obvious that we've been friends for a very long time. However, we have different worldviews, and that is acceptable. That is something that you need to accept in your everyday life. Even when you have these deep discussions, and you might be not not agreeing with the other person, i.e., disagreeing with the different person, that does not mean that you should not be friends or know this individual. We live in a world where nothing is really right or nothing. Well, there are things that are definitely right and definitely wrong. However, we don't live in, luckily for us, in this part of the world at least, we can have our opinions, we can have our values, we can have our morals. Those are the glasses. We're allowed to wear different glasses. And just because someone is wearing a different glass than you, or have a different eye vision, right, does not mean that you should exclude them from your life, or think about them as different from yourself. But accept them as they are, talk to them, understand how they view the world, and try to create a common ground. I'm sure that what we all want is a better world. All of us, regardless of the glasses that we're wearing, and the ideologies, and the mentality, and the morals, and even the choices that we make in life. We all try to be better, or at least we're convinced that we want to be better, right? And that is at least one thing that I hope we can all agree upon, and we can start from there. Question is then, how do we carry on forward? And it's definitely not by shunning people and putting people into groups, but more that we come together and talk to each other. And that is what this podcast is about, and this is what my life is about, and I hope that we can share that with one another. So remember that you are wearing glasses, if you like it or not. Be aware that you're wearing glasses. Be critical for the glasses that you're wearing, and be open that other people might be wearing other glasses. Thanks for today, and as always, take care of yourself, man. Love yourself, and I love you all. See ya.